On today's episode of Dr. Momcast, we talk about the injured athlete, something we're seeing a lot of in the headlines these days. We talk about how injury can affect each athlete in a personal way, the physical and mental health toll sports injury can take, and tools to help athletes through rehabilitation and recovery. This is Real Moms talking about real science in real life.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Dr. Momcast. I am Dr. Marla Shapiro here with some of my favorite sports neuropsychology colleagues.
Dr. Alyssa Wickland,
Dr. Lisa Napolpaka,
Dr. Sonia Mosh,
Dr. Summer Ott.
And we are here to talk about kids, health, sports, safety, anything else that comes up along the way. I realize we haven't talked about headlines in a while, but I think some of the recent headlines really tie nicely into some of the questions I know Summer wanted to talk about. We're going to talk about injury later, but not only did Chris Golick in that fabulous interview bring up dealing with her kids' injuries, we had Simone Biles coming back and kicking butt on an international stage. One of my favorite stories, though, was, I don't know if any of you watch track and field. I happen to love watching track and field. And did you hear the story about the pole vault?
Tell us, Marla.
I know you're on the edge of your seats. An American, Australian were tied for the gold medal, and there was pressure to continue to jump to see who could actually jump the highest. And the American made the decision to say, no, I'm done. She said, this is not supposed to be an endurance event. She was getting tired. The more tired you are, the greater the risk of injury. And she decided to say, no, I think I'm done. I don't want to get hurt. Shared the gold medal with her friend and competition and got flack for it.
Oh, I was just going to say, what a heartwarming story.
Yeah. People said, no, this is competition. Dang it, we got to have a winner. And I'm thinking, here's somebody at the top of her game who not only showed grace, but also prevented herself from further injury. She's protecting her ability to compete, taking care of her body, and yet that's not good enough. But I think it's a great segue into talking about injured athletes.
I would also add that Simone Biles pulled herself during Olympic competition. And so she communicated to the public that she didn't feel like she was at her best mentally. And so she withdrew, and that sparked a lot of controversy. Simone Biles doing that on the Olympic stage. I think it has inspired other prominent athletes, such as what you mentioned, Marla, in your headline, to come forward and admit when they're not feeling physically and mentally capable of performing. That is an aspect that I think is often neglected after an injury. Many times the physical parts are seen when the athlete's injured, but what happens is the psychological consequences for the athlete or the emotional toll it can take on them is almost always overlooked. And then the athletes themselves often downplay any kind of emotional response. It happened in our household. Actually, my daughter made the dance team. She's a freshman in high school. She ended up pulling a hamstring, and it was pretty painful. And we took her to one of my colleagues, and he gave her particular restrictions. And I could see the sadness in her face. Okay, what is this going to mean for me? I just made this team and I'm doing really well. She's diligent in her rehab, lots of reinforcement, doing really well. What are the mental health risks that you've seen in athletes that you work with that are sidelined to injury?
Anxiety. Today was actually cut day for the NFL. All of the teams went down to 53 players, and we've all probably seen tons of rookies this preseason who are injured because they are throwing everything they have into trying to make that team, anxious that they're going to lose their spot, or that if they are a starter, their second string is going to get out there to fill in for them, but end up doing better, and they're going to lose their spot. Or just the fear of not wanting to sit out, but then being scared to hurt themselves more. It's multifaceted.
Another thing, I wonder if another risk is if sport is all that kids have and it's all consuming, are they not that much more vulnerable to feeling the pain because it's not like they have a side gig and it is all of their identity? Does that make sense?
Yeah, because I think it's more tough if you only have your eggs in one basket. Where other athletes that I've worked at, I'm sure you ladies have had the same experience. If they're also a baseball player, in the case of this particular athlete, he was devastated, but he also can look forward because he has baseball too. And if he didn't have that, I would imagine it would be much more impactful for him.
I also think there's a peer cost of social relationships, especially football and team sports. This is your family, man, and those shared experiences. And I think that's a huge cost.
I think there's two camps too, really. There's the invisible injury and then the visible injury. If you tear your ACL and you're wearing a brace and you're on crutches, I think sometimes those athletes are received differently than the hamstring pull that you can't see, or the
Right.
concussion that you can't
Action.
see. I think the mental health aspects are a bit dependent on, can we see this injury or not? They get different pressures, right? The invisible injury, are they getting pressures of you're faking it, or you need to work harder, or you're being soft? Whereas with the visible injury, I think that's almost a different experience because it's obvious that there's an injury.
That's a really
Now-
good point, Alyssa.
Right.
Yeah. And the loss of social connectedness, I think if you aren't around your team, given maybe how catastrophic your injury is, what you can and can't do. Some with minor injuries may be able to go to practice still and hang out, go to games, but if you can't, wow, that's their socialization. Sonia, have you worked with athletes that had a really severe injury that they had PTSD responses?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I want to talk about PTSD and PTG. Okay, so a lot of letters. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. PTG is post-traumatic growth. PTG is experiencing something traumatic and then becoming a better version of yourself as a result. And the trauma doesn't necessarily have to be a life-threatening event or an assault or being in a war zone. Post-traumatic stress disorder is what Summer's referring to. It can be serious injury, or family member passes away, or something devastating in your community. Perhaps there's a natural disaster. Those types of things can also be considered traumatic if it is a threat to your mental wellness and stability. It doesn't necessarily always refer to some type of physical threat. If an athlete experiences some kind of traumatic injury, anything that reminds you of the initial event trigger an anxiety response. Think about it in terms of normalizing that for your athlete, because that's actually how humans survive. When we get hurt, we try not to get hurt again. So this is a survival mechanism. So first of all, that makes you a little scared, because that's when we fall or get hurt, our bodies need to know that that wasn't very safe. Whatever just happened.
Yeah, you can't fix stupid. You can fix the knee, but you can't fix stupid. If you're going to keep doing the same thing over and over again with the same outcome, we can't fix that. Your body's warning you.
Exactly. It's survival. If we don't learn from injuries, our species is not going to continue. So first of all, normalize that. Of course, you're anxious. And of course, that's a normal reaction to being out there again with a healthy knee. You're going to re-experience that feeling. But the other hand, we know that the best treatment for anxiety is to slowly expose yourself to the thing you're afraid of and not allow you to avoid it or retreat. So helping you manage the anxiety while you're exposing yourself to it, that is what sort of treats, so to speak, that post-traumatic stress experience of being in that same environment or having that same muscle movement or whatever that triggered the injury in the first place. So don't allow your quote, traumatized, injured athlete to just retreat and avoid it, because avoidance builds more anxiety, builds more avoidance.
I love how you talked about the opportunity for growth and to normalize it, because sometimes we think anxiety is bad, being without anxiety is good. Therefore, the goal is to eradicate it. You're going to feel nervous, and that's normal, and that's okay.
That's normal. So it's not eradicating anxiety, it's managing it. How do we manage it? So yes, okay, you're in the same exact scenario. Your leg feels the same. The smell in the arena is the same. Whatever little stimulus brings that memory to the forefront is going to bring those fearful memories to the forefront. That's okay. That's your body saying, hey, be careful. We really hurt last night.
I think that's a lot of the rehab process maybe that doesn't get talked about, is that confidence building.
Yes.
When you're returning to play, there's a lot of focus on the physical aptitude of the athlete to get back. But part of the reps and the weight training and all the things you're doing to rehab is to build your confidence again. Is that part of post-traumatic growth, Sonia?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that's been studied fairly extensively in the last 7 to 10 years is this concept of PTG, post-traumatic growth, that adverse events, really significantly adverse events, can actually be incredibly useful for everybody in all realms of your life, but especially for athletes. And there's a group in the UK that has been studying Olympians, gold medalists, and trying to understand their takeaways from adverse events. And they're not, oh, I sprained my knee. It's like a disaster in your hometown, terrorism, death of a close family member, serious illness or injury, really significant adverse events. In every gold medalist that was studied, they described these horrible experiences as being pivotal in getting their gold medal. There's some factors that contribute to how do you take something like breaking a femur and losing an entire season? How do you take something like that and turn that into the thing that propels you to the goal? One of the things that propel people to make that mental shift is social support and developing a community, and also having a sense of meaning and even finding a sense of spirituality around it.
Sonia, you're moving to that about ways we can specifically support the injured athlete. Lisa, what are some ways that you've talked to parents about or even helped your own children when they've been injured to support them getting back on the court or sideline, wherever that may be?
I think a big part, we already talked about the community and the sense of team and family that these kids have. Instinctively, we say, still go to practice, be a part of that community, travel with the team if you can, be there on the sidelines. However, I think it has to be very individualized. For some people, it's almost worse to sit and watch their teammates play, and it ends up being more damaging psychologically. I would say it's really important to be ready to course correct and take it very individually. I always do recommend go to the practices. But if it's not feeling good or if it's causing you more stress, don't go to practices. You have to do what's good for yourself. And eventually, we're going to have to dip our toe in and get back into activity if they're going to return to their sport.
That's such a good point, Lisa. If you know your kid has FOMO on every aspect of their life, that's the kid that's probably going to want to be sitting watching the practice. But if you have a kid who's 1 foot in, 1 foot out, or a little shyer, a little more embarrassed, doesn't want to be seen while they're injured, it can vary.
If your second string is Tom Brady or Aaron Rodgers, which is how they both earn their spot, is because somebody was hurt and these two come in, like, are you kidding me? And they get to watch the next GOAT take his spot.
Yeah, I'm not going to that practice.
Now, Alyssa, when we were talking about the show, one of the points you made about bouncing and what direction you're going to bounce in. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. And Sonia's brought that up with resiliency, the idea of bouncing forward. I think sometimes it's an opportunity to figure out which way you're going to bounce. It can be a time of self-reflection. What made me think of that is the athletes that use the injury as it drags on. Maybe you're sensing they don't want to go back to sport. What else is going on here? Why is this injury taking so long to heal? And that may be an opportunity for them to reflect. And even younger kids can do this. Like, I don't really want to bounce back to this particular team. I'm thinking I'd like to bounce right back into the orchestra. So it might be, I might bounce sideways right back into pottery class at any level of sport, professional, kids, whatever. Is this a sport I want to play? Do I want to do this again and get injured in this way? And for some, the answer is yes. I will get through this injury and I will do anything to rehab to get back to the sport. For others, sometimes in that downtime, what are my skill sets? What is this really what I want to do? And
I'm afraid there's a lot of athletes that get overlooked in that way because no one's asked the question.
Good point.
And many times, I think, because given our background, that when we know recovery isn't going the way in terms of a trajectory, and you start asking, is there anything holding you back? And I love that you mentioned that, Alyssa, because I don't think a lot of people or parents even know to have that conversation because they're only going on one path, and that's rehab. Speaking of rehab, do you guys have any tips? When I go in the training rooms, the professional level, people are working out with buddies and other injured people, and they're bantering and they're joking, and it looks like a positive situation. Any tips like that? Is it a good idea to start telling people about, look at this person, they overcame something, or is that not good to do? Or maybe that's individual.
To Alyssa's point earlier, it's what does your kid need? Some kids really need and feed off the energy of others, and they don't want to feel alone. Others are like, let me just sit in my circle by myself and go away. Some kids want to come back slowly. Some kids want to come back full tilt. I think treating rehab just like which direction they're going to bounce, I think our assumption is you're going to go back right back to where you were and you're going to go all out to rehab. Having that conversation with your kid, I think, is essential.
I was thinking about visualization. There's a lot of good studies that shows the same parts of the brain fire when you're visualizing a physical action as if you're actually doing the action. So that's sometimes an overlooked rehabilitation tool of actually closing your eyes and visualizing, whether it's kicking the ball or it's a sequence of events or if it's visualizing a play. I think give athletes a tool if they're going to continue in their sport to hone that skill, not feel as though they're getting behind while they're rehabbing.
I taught the sports psychology class. We talked about when you have knee surgery and you're trying to do your range of motion and you're visualizing yourself getting, Marla knows all too well, you're visualizing yourself trying to get more motion, more mobility. Okay, I went further, and that has often been helpful. Did you ever do that, Marla?
Oh, heck yeah. My last knee surgery, I had a whiteboard in the den. And I had my exercises. I would have these arguments with myself. You really hate sitting here, then get off your butt and do your damn rehab. And so that might appeal to some kids to rechannel their effort into rehab. But the visualizing, I don't know. One of the favorite things I've heard y'all say is just so when you're really talking about find the silver lining. What could positively come out of this? I think it encompasses visualizing. It encompasses where you could be next. What are you going to do about it? And a real positive way to adapt to injury.
And also just helping our kid athletes just understand that if the good that comes out of this is that you realize how strong you are mentally, that is a gift you give yourself for the rest of your life. That is so much more important than how strong your joint is or whatever was injured. If you come out of this knowing, I did it, I survived this, I rehabbed and I worked hard and I got back. If you know that you are getting better and better as a person, that's the silver lining. I'm getting better and stronger on the inside. And that is really what makes the difference between elite athletes is how they are on the inside. It's not their physical prowess. At the most elite levels of performance, it's the mental differences that distinguish a Hall of Famer from another.
When do I seek mental health or more support for my injured athlete?
Watching for the classic signs of mental health stuff, which if you aren't aware of them, watch for changes in your kid emotionally. If their behavior patterns are different, if they're sleeping a ton, if they're not sleeping when they normally sleep very well, if they're eating a ton or they're not eating anything at all, or if they're getting extra tearful or irritable or more agitated than usual, any sort of change that you see. We all have our bad days. If the bad days become several in a row, if it's like a week straight, I'm going to start digging a little bit deeper. And if they're not willing to disclose to us as parents, then I think the logical next step is to get professional help.
To add to that, Lisa, ask your kid's teacher, how have they seemed in class lately? Do they seem like themselves? If your school has a school counselor, if there's an athletic trainer, ask the athletic trainer if they'll reach out to your kid and check in. Sometimes kids will come home and let it all out, and we bear the brunt of it because we're safe spaces. If they're a social kid who has suddenly decided they don't want to go out on Friday nights. So it's not just the sad down in the dumps, but changes in behaviors. I think those would be red flags too.
Yeah, just on their phone by themselves or a drop in grades, not catastrophizing, but trying to be inquisitive about it. I want to read you guys this quote from this article. It's from the Journal of Science in Medicine and Sport. The title of the article is "What Doesn't Kill Me, ... Adversity-related experiences are vital in the development of superior Olympic performance." This is from this group I was telling you about. They have this summary statement: talent needs trauma. In order to really hone your talent, eventually that talent gets honed and purified under the lens of trauma. That's how we refine our gifts, if you will. It's a shift in how we look at injuries. It's a shift in how we look at traumatic experiences. So hockey player is really shining superstar, about to make the A team, having the summer of his life, ACL blowout, surgery. And so I said to him, is there any possible thing you can think of that might turn out to be a good thing from this? He looked at me like I had horns growing out of my head because, of course, what the hell?
Well, you're the only mom that's going to ask it like that because you're a psychologist.
Yeah. So, and he's like, what do you mean? And I said, is there any possible thing that you could think of down the road might actually turn out to be a good thing about this happening to you right now when you're peaking? He thought about it. He was like, I guess it forces me to think about what else I have fun doing.
There you go.
Sonia, I was going to ask you a resiliency question, which is how much does having a timeline or a plan help? Because not all injuries obviously have a clear timeline. And then some do, 6 months, 3 months. And what do you do if there is no time?
I think that's a great question. One exercise that I have used with injured athletes and soldiers is to ask them to try to visualize in their mind a year from now. For a lot of sports injuries, that's usually full recovery. And think about where you're going to be then, what that's going to feel like, how much stronger this joint is going to be, or how much tougher you're going to feel mentally, how much more you're going to appreciate your body, how much you're going to be more in touch with what your risk factors are, what are your warning signs that your body gives you that you need to pay attention to. Think about where you're going to be in 12 months, and then look in the rearview mirror and think about how much it sucks right now. Okay. So right now you're in the suck.
Always in the suck.
You're going to sit in the suck. That's where we are right now. That's okay. The great thing about life is that time doesn't stop. Time's going to keep going, marching forward with or without you. And if you can think about what your life is going to be like in a year or 6 months and think back to how you feel right now, you're going to have huge appreciation for yourself, your strength, inner fortitude, the support of your parents, teachers, athletic trainers, and help them almost fantasize about what it feels like to be recovered.
Is that true for younger kids also? I'm thinking about thinking a year ahead. I feel like my kids don't necessarily think about tomorrow.
With younger kids, it's helpful. Think back to something in their life that they've already gone through that was tough and use that as an example. Like, do you remember when you had chicken pox and like you couldn't see?
Okay, you're dating yourself there, man.
I mean, we all had it. Our kids never do.
Do you remember when our phones couldn't go in our pockets, maybe? Yeah.
Remember when you had COVID and you were out of school for 2 weeks?
Something that was really yucky that they know they've survived.
Good idea, Sonia. I think it'd be helpful to talk about some things you want to avoid saying to your kid or someone that you know that's injured. You mean well, but probably not a good idea.
It's just a knee injury, honey. Minimizing it for sure. To all the points about what does it mean for your kid and what works best for them, don't try to contextualize it by putting it down.
The other thing I would say is, I think in general, everyone's experience is going to be different. A way to say it that's sort of helpful, supportive, and not judgy is to just say, I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes right now.
Ooh, that's a good one.
But it must be really hard.
That's great.
Because you're acknowledging, I don't know. You were just about to make the A team and then the stupid thing happened and it's not even your fault. I don't know what it's like to be in your shoes right now, but it must really suck. It acknowledges that when someone's going through some trauma and people who love them, who mean well, say, no, I understand. No, you fucking don't. That's just the bottom line. No one understands your own experience the way you do.
Yes. Or how about it's not the end of the world? It's so common. For the person, it is the end of their world to them at the moment, and helping them, as you all have mentioned before, find other meaning and other things. We move towards that. But at that moment, it is. My husband has a torn bicep now and a partial tricep tear.
Ouch.
Going to undergo surgery, and he lifts weights. I always joke that he loves weight training more than he loves me. To him, that is devastating that he's not working out.
Because it's
so
part
I
of
better
his
not
mental
say that
health and his self-care. Yeah, that is devastating. I think it's just always the best idea to let people feel what they feel and say, I am so sorry. That
however they have to express it or feel it.
Yeah.
And I think the comparison game can be tricky too. For some people, it can be helpful have you seen the inspirational story of fill in the blank who came back for whatever? But for other people, that is not going to be helpful at all. That's going to make them feel worse. They're already comparing themselves. You don't need to say, well, look at Joe. He was better from that same injury in 3 months. That could be true, but that may not be their experience. Everybody's timeline is different, especially for the teenage athlete or the elite athlete. There's a lot of comparison they're probably
Oh
already in
my
their own head
goodness. They
with.
live in this world of self-comparison. I think it's okay to just validate yours is going to be different. I don't know what yours is like, but I know it must be hard.
What do you think about connecting them with someone who has had a similar experience? Good, bad, depends on the kid
I think
or
it's a depending
athlete.
thing too, right? It's like support groups. For some people, it's
Not
they
for
build the
everybody.
camaraderie. For others, like, I really don't want to sit around and listen to your shit all day.
Right.
So it can go either way. Going back and knowing the athlete, that's what we're
Mhm.
mentioning here for many of these approaches that we apply. What about resources? Sideline USA, which is a nonprofit organization that supports athletes who are, and this is more for a situation where they're permanently sidelined, but they actually help families with connections, mentorship. They have podcasts with athletes sharing their story.
There's a book called Rebound, Train Your Mind to Bounce Back Stronger from Sports Injuries. Website is the injuredathleteclub.com. They have newsletters and podcasts and other resources. And again, to your point, somewhere about support groups, that may not be for everybody, but then I think sometimes, even if it's not overtly joining, just knowing there are others out there who have gone through that, and then the athlete can do with that what they need. If there's someone who's a joiner and want to be connected, they can choose that. They can just read the materials. They could listen to a podcast. So I think it gives the athlete a lot of control to choose the route that's going to be the most helpful to them for recovery.
That's a great recommendation. Just that don't force them into it, but hey, if you would be interested and
Yeah, this is available.
But not suckitupbuttercup.com. That's just not going to fly.
I'm not sure I know what that is.
Suck it up, buttercup. Obviously, you don't parent the way I do.
Clearly, my house just is full of injuries lately. So that's all we have. So as far as takeaways, sports injuries do have the psychological component that's often overlooked. We tend to focus on rehabbing the person from the physical aspect, neglecting the psychological. And then we've identified some mental health concerns that can occur in athletes as well. We've talked about those, how to identify them, some resources. What other takeaways do y'all have, ladies?
One of the things that I think is tough for a kid who's in a sport where there's a very predictable schedule is to not have structure. Sometimes kids who just all of a sudden have all this downtime, that in and of itself can get depressing. Helping them develop a schedule can be helpful.
Wow. This was great. Summer, I hope your beloved offspring is doing better, that she's rehabbed. But I thank her for giving us this stimulus to talk about this. And I think it's so relevant. It's not just the greatest of all time, a Simone Biles that has the twisties or gold medal winning athletes. It affects our kids every day. And I love that we have professional and elite athletes set the stage, so to speak, to show it's okay to manage your injury and to do whatever you need to do to take care of your body, your mind, your health in whatever way needs to happen. So hopefully, the tips that we've shared can be helpful to the parents of the athletes we see around us every day. I don't know. We don't put a fork in it, maybe put a stitch in it, wrap it in an ace and call it a day.
Good night, bitches.